Hello, I'm Vicki Brooke. I'm with Virginia Commonwealth University, and I'm here to introduce our first speaker in the University of Illinois Customized Employment Series, and that's Dr. Paul Wehman. Paul is the director of the RRTC at Virginia Commonwealth University, and he has been there for, I guess, 40 years, right, Paul? So Paul has really been, has a long history of one of the early pioneers in supported employment. So he's going to be able to bring a great perspective to the movement of supported employment and how we move to a customized employment that's in the new WHEEL regulations. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul. Paul?
First of all those faces you see behind me are grandchildren and children over the last 20 or 30 years of my life, okay, or 35 years of my life even, and I hope it's not too distracting. So when Katie asked me to, be involved with the course, I was trying to think of things that might be interesting in the sense that maybe it's not something that we normally talk about in support employment or customized employment, okay? Generally, we kind of go through what the model is and the procedures and things like that. And I'm going to have my glasses on and off because I just had cataract surgery and I can't figure out what I am. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that between what you've been doing with your regular work life and, what the information is that you're going to be getting from Caddy, that you're going to learn a lot about support employment. But because support employment's been around, gosh, I guess we were part of the beginning of the thing in the early 80s. So that's, 4 decades. But in the end, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, okay? And so when it doesn't work, people are like, well, support employment is no good. Or if it works, then families are like, wow, this is the greatest thing in the world. Like we just interviewed 5 individuals with autism who have been working for the last couple of years, and Autism Speaks wanted to know how they were dealing with the pandemic. And I mean, these were obviously all people who needed employment specialists. They were all challenged, but they were all successful. And to a person, they all could only sing the praises about supported employment and why it was good and how great the job coach was and how great the employment specialist was in dealing with the employer and the coworkers and all that. Well, basically the title of this presentation, and I think we'll go ahead and put this up, Lucian, right now, is taking a slightly different tack, and that is let's see. Oh, good. I can move over that way. Good. It's about not so much what is support employment, but is it a good model, a bad model, or is it really just, honestly, bad implementation? And I've concluded over and over and over again when I consult or when I have people come to my office and they're talking about why something's not working, including some of our own employment specialists, that more often than not, it's just not being implemented right. The fidelity of it is not good. So let's take a look at about 4 or 5 what I would call, for lack of a better term, threats. So let's take a look at the next slide. So, I kind of asked myself, well, all right, how would I categorize, quote, bad support employment? And for those of you that are on this thread now, as well as others who are going to hear the recording, this comes partly from reading the research literature, which I still do very regularly, listening to our own employment specialists, listening to families, listening to voc rehab counselors, but above all, periodically just going out and, seeing what's happening. And they seem to kind of fall into a category of about 5 different areas. All right. And now I will break this up with a streaming video of a young person who went through an internship and then has been employed for quite a long time. So you're not going to have to just look at words and hear me. All right. So what's the first major threat? Next slide. So it seems that by and large, and it may be that because employment specialists are, often trained with a human service or a social service background and not a business background, that there is what I would call not the best employer engagement. Okay. And by that, I mean, communicating well with the employer, building a partnership, talking to them about their business. Because one thing employers love to do is talk about their business. So you ask them, how is business? Is it a problem that Caribou Coffee just moved in if you're talking to somebody from Starbucks? And I would think it'd be a problem because it'd be competition. But in fact, what happens, and I've asked that question of people in Washington, D.C., where there's a lot of Caribou Coffee, they like competition because it draws more people in that want coffee. And so some people will go one place, some places will go another. In other words, the pie's bigger, which is why, of course, we have malls. Well, we had malls. Malls are going to have to reinvent themselves. But the whole concept of having stores near each other is seen as good because the pie is bigger. And so it really is incumbent on employment specialists, whether you're doing it yourself or you're training somebody or you're mentoring somebody, to really learn how to understand the employer's business. And I'm going to give you a couple of sales statistics that kind of blew me away. And the next 2 slides are going to be about what a company will tell somebody who's a salesperson, which in a way you kind of are. You're selling, the employee, and you're selling yourself as a support person. So let's take a look at something information about sales statistics and how that relates to employer engagement. Okay. So let's just substitute temporarily in your mind, not sales, but employment specialists. Okay. This statistic, these 2 pages are pretty amazing. About half of all salespeople never follow up with a prospect. Okay. Not even, once. Only a fourth make a second contact and then they stop. I guess they just give up. They don't want to be rejected anymore. 1 out of 8, 12%, will make 3 contacts and they still can't get the placement. They quit. And only 10%, 1 out of 10 of salespeople / employment specialists make more than 3 contacts. So think about that a minute. I mean, you wonder why job development is hard. Job development is really hard because we don't have enough employer engagement. And we continue on here. We take another look in the next slide. We find out that lo and behold, only 2% of sales / placements are made in the first contact, 3% on the second contact, 1 out of 20 on the third contact. Are we getting the message? 1 out of 10 on the fourth contact. In short, if you want to make a placement, whether it's customized employment or support employment, you're going to have to hit that employer 5 to 12 times, which means that you've got to figure out how not to be obnoxious, how to create a relationship, and just let them know that, you know, the person or persons that you have in mind, you know, kind of have them look at you like you're a supply of potential demand. Because remember this, folks, no business can grow without good workers. No business can increase their revenue without good workers. And so, you know, some of the workers may be salespeople, but other workers may be people who are really great on the phone or make good eye contact when people come in the door. All right. So let that sink in a little bit, and then go to the next slide, and you see that here's our second big threat, and that is we give up, and what happens then when we give up is we say, what the heck, I've had it. We're going to take that placement. We end up with a poor job match for the individual. And that's bad too. I mean, that's almost as bad, if not worse in some ways, because you're potentially damaging what the business thinks about you. So the second big threat is really that the client really might not like the work, but you've kind of forced them into it because you need the placement, or the business doesn't know any difference. They're trying to do the right thing, but the person has been matched into the situation where they can really add value to the business. And it's not hard to see how that happens, is it? When you look at those sales statistics that came out in Forbes magazine. That was a Forbes magazine article that a colleague of mine, Jennifer McDonough, turned me on to. And I just thought it would, it's either going to scare you away from support employment, or it's going to be very humbling. Okay, so the next threat. Once again, we're talking about a lack of persistence, and even more so, essentially a lack of creativity. And so we already kind of covered the persistence thing about just not making a high enough frequency of contacts. Okay. And we'll return a little bit more to that on the next slide, but we should also be talking about creativity, because if we're talking about customized employment, then we should be asking the employers, do you give your regular workers overtime, which means they have to pay more, or they might do better to customize a job for somebody and not have to pay your regular person overtime? Or are there certain jobs that never get done because nobody wants to do them? Or is there work here that you would consider hiring somebody else for, but you just hadn't really thought about it? And how can you find that out? There's only one way you can find that out. You've got to be in that business. You've got to be in that company, in those different departments. So if you get a no at Target, then don't just leave. Go to the different departments and start learning and looking at who's doing what in those different departments. You'll see stocking. You'll see, clicking on, little machines to put the, the scanner thing on. You'll see people carrying things in and out. You'll see them hanging clothes. You'll see them picking up clothes off the floor. All right. You'll see them helping people at the checkout line. Those are all potential jobs, but you don't know about that unless you had a business background, or you're persistent enough or creative enough to take a look at that. So, now we can take a look, maybe like the next slide. So in this same Forbes article, they do a really neat thing. They say, don't just stop at persistence, because just showing up all the time, that's just like the vacuum cleaner, man, when you don't need a vacuum cleaner. They talk about planned persistence. And I really love this slide, okay? Because what they're saying is you have to look at your timing. Are you showing up at the right time? So if it's the busiest time of the day and you decide, oh, well, I think I'm going to go see the employer, I'm going to do a cold call, well, you're going to get the cold shoulder. We've already talked about frequency. I mean, frequency can be a real problem if you don't have the guts to keep going back in there. That's why you need to create the relationship. And there may be multiple people, multiple supervisors that you need to get to know. And they tend to learn about you and your agency. And then maybe the most important thing, although I don't know what could be more important than frequency in some ways, but is your message. What is it that you are saying? Are you offering up yourself as a support mechanism to the company? Because many companies have never heard of customized or support employment. They don't know what a job coach is. We can't make the assumption of that at all. I mean, you could have a whole new set of supervisors in there that just all came in, and they just came in from Maryland and into Richmond, and in the Annapolis, they never did support employment. They know the first thing about it. So you got to have a message about who you are and what you can do, and then you got to have a message about their company and what you think about their company and how you think you can help their company. And then finally, how you can help their company would be the use of you and the individual you're representing as an advocate. And you're shooting for an opportunity to have a meeting between the person and the individual supervisor. Lots of times these jobs are not advertised. So you're out there hustling them and you're trying to create them. Now those jobs may be already, they might be ready to post them, and you're just out there ahead of other people. So this planned persistence as a follow-up, really, in some ways, to just the timing and the frequency is very important, a message. So let that kind of sink in to you, all right? Now notice so far, everything that we've really talked about has been heavily driven around the demand side, AKA business, because business is the bank. Okay, that's where the money is. So if you can't connect with that business, or your staff can't connect with the business, then you're not going to get good quality placements that are going to be retained and with everybody satisfied. The only way to have good long-term placements is if the company is satisfied, because they're paying money, and the client has to be satisfied that they like their work, or they won't show up or they'll quit. So all that takes time. But if we spend too much time on just training the client on work adjustment skills, for example, but we don't even know what it is that the person really needs, because we don't have a target business in mind, then it's not a good use of the money, and it's not a good use of your time. Okay? All right, so what's the fourth threat? Oh, that's good, Leah. So we're going to have time for questions because probably in about another 8 or 10 minutes, I'm going to stop and leave some time for comments or questions, which I would really like to have. So now we switch over to the supply side, okay, which is about what it is that your employment specialist is supposed to do. And I've lumped them in. I mean, there's multiple tasks and things, and this will be covered throughout the course, okay? And it's going to be part of the course in a big way. And you'll see them in a second with a video that I have for you. You'll see it directly. But you're talking about accommodations, which can be changing the work. It could be modifying the tasks, doing part of the task and sharing the task with a so-called non-disabled worker. You're almost always, if you're talking about pretty rapid placement, you're going to be talking about needing high quality, behaviorally oriented, systematic instruction, which is going to include things like task analysis, modeling, giving people feedback when they're not doing it right, practice, and you keep track of your hours to see how much time you're spending, and you should be spending less hours as time goes on. I often wonder why more people are still on day activity programs as opposed to competitive employment, because competitive employment it's just such a richer outcome to be out in the real world. And then I look at these threats and I realize why they're not. It's because what we're talking about here in this course, it's not easy. It's not easy. If it was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. Okay. It's actually, I hate to use this word, but it's actually hard because you're trying to put together a variety of pieces all into one. Now, in some organizations, they will use one person who just does the job finding, and then somebody else comes on and does the training. If that works for you and it's successful, go for it. In our shop, we've been doing this for 3 decades and more, really. And we don't do that because we like the employer to basically see the same 1 or 2 people all the time. So they develop the relationship and it's more seamless. And sometimes that's not always possible. So what we're going to do next is about a 4.5 minute, maybe a little bit more, not much. Really pretty interesting slide video that I want to set up for you, okay, before we play it. So this person has a diagnosis of I would be more inclined to say severe than moderate autism, but he clearly has autism. He was part of a Project Search program. Actually, one of the charter members back in 2010 and 11 when and he was in the treatment group. We did a randomized clinical trial study, and half of all the people that were coming out of high school stayed at the high school and got their regular program as is, and the other half got people like the employment specialist who's going to narrate what is happening here to Damien, okay? And the only way that we could think of orchestrating this, any of these videos, and we have a couple dozen of them at least, is to have the employment specialist that's worked with them narrate the story, okay? And you'll see, these different, what I will call subtasks that he's had to learn along the way. And now he's been working for many years now, okay? And I see him whenever I go over to St. Mary's because my son works over at St. Mary's sometimes. So he's around all the time. So without any further ado, go ahead, Lucian, let's turn it on for people, okay?
Doing what you're doing.
I make a transformer. 5.
Ready, Daniel?
Yes, I'm ready.
Damien had an internship in the inpatient pharmacy. He was responsible for checking all of the drugs. They're individually packed and checking the expiration dates. And he also was responsible for cleaning the shelves, and just really keeping it very organized in the department. This is something that they often needed a tech to do, but it really wasn't getting done as frequently as it probably should have been.
There is 6 runs to go, right?
This turned into a job because as the internship was coming to a close, the department really didn't see how they could continue without having him there to complete this job for them, because it really is critical. The job really evolved. In addition to checking the expiration dates, Damien also learned how to restock drugs, and then he learned how to make deliveries to the outpatient infusion center. This kind of came about because Damien was getting done with his work quickly, and he has a lot of energy, and that energy was being released in the department, which was causing a distraction to his coworkers. He has a tendency to script loudly, and he was actually getting on coworkers' computers and finding things to fill his own time with, which were not productive and were distracting to the department. His supervisors wanted to continue to have him working there, and so they contacted his job coach to see what we could do to continue to use his assets, but also to help out the department. And so that's how the delivery started. The outpatient infusion center is attached to the hospital, and this is where patients are going to receive chemotherapy and other cancer treatments.
Thank you for doing it.
When we're waiting in this room, how should we wait?
By the door.
And what's our volume?
Volume down. Volume down. I wait for Jessica in there.
Damien, it's okay to speak in a regular volume.
She's in the room.
Okay. We just can't shout things like, "I'm finished." Does that make sense?
Nope. Not makes sense.
When we're at work?
I keep the volume down. I keep the voice down.
How about your body?
Keep my body still.
Hello.
I knock by the door.
Okay, Damien.
It's
what
another
number is
run.
this one?
6.
Right.
This run is number 6. Non-chemo. No way, Stephen. No way. Yes.
At the time, a volunteer was responsible for making the deliveries to the outpatient infusion center from the pharmacy, or if a volunteer wasn't there, one of the pharmacists or the techs had to do it. It really wasn't done on a strict schedule, and patients were having to wait several hours to get the treatment. The inpatient pharmacy and the outpatient infusion center decided to collaborate and create this job for Damien so that he was helping their department to run more efficiently to provide better care to the patients who were waiting for treatment.
I finish. Number 6 is finish. Dash. I work in the pharmacy and OPIC. I open a suitcase, wait for chemo, and on chemo, I check expiration dates at work. I pull expired drugs and find month. I stay off this computers at work. I eat lunch. I follow the rules. I follow the plan.
Who wrote that?
I wrote it.
That's great. Damien's been working for almost 5 years, and we do continue to provide him with social supports at work. At this point, we are no longer implementing a self-monitoring plan and working on it together 4 times throughout the day. His department has been trained on how to enforce the rules, and Damien is at the point now where he has written his own plan, and he knows what the expectations are, and it's written clearly for him by himself.
Where we do next, Stephen? Where we do next?
Chemo and non-chemo.
They're both.
Yep, they're both.
Yes, they're both. What time is it?
Time to go.
10:30, please.
10:30.
The answer is 10:30. Run number 7.
We do continue to communicate regularly with the departments, and they know that they're able to contact us if there is a situation that becomes larger than what they feel that they're able to handle, or that they need additional support. Then they always call us, and we come and provide immediate support to the department and the employee.
So, a couple comments on this, on Damien. One, he has been extraordinarily regular at work all the time and requires very little support, but does need periodic support. One of the reasons that I like hospitals, not just because of Project Search, as for internships, is the same reason I like universities, or even like a Sam's Club, or even a Walmart potentially, or a Costco, and that is multiple departments. Most hospitals have of any size have anywhere from 40 to 50 to as many as 70 or 80 departments. And of course, then there's many different types of people. You've got surgeons all the way down to facility support people, volunteers, not to mention, of course, the multitude of patients and families that come in. So it's a tremendous opportunity to try and learn soft skills, navigation skills, as well as specific task skills. And this is probably a good opportunity for me to really put a plug in for internships. These Project Search internships are 9 months. I don't know that they really need to be 9 months, to be honest with you. They are 9 months, but we've been trying to follow the model from Cincinnati. I think there's any of a number of people that really could be maybe 2 rotations of 10 weeks, 6 months, maybe 5 months. It becomes more expensive the longer you go. And of course, some of the people that were interned were placed. And once they were placed, we stopped the internship, of course. But in other words, the hospital, for example, would hire them, all right? But it's a good way to see the interaction with the business, and also the critical importance of Alyssa, who is an outstanding employment specialist, okay? I've yet to see a really good support employment program without a really good employment specialist, okay? I mean, it's just, you just can't do it halfway. You have to be all in, and quite honestly, avoid those threats. You know, the 4 threats that we've done. And Lucian, if you move on to the last one, we can touch base on that last threat.
Doing what you're doing.
And that is basically, we leave too soon. All right. The whole concept of supported employment and customized employment is that you're working with people who, if they could do it on their own, or just through placement with a rehab counselor who checks in and talks to them on the phone periodically, then you wouldn't need an employment specialist. But these tend to be individuals that need generally long-term support. And the challenge is not to over-support, but not to under-support. And that means tracking carefully how somebody's doing, talking to coworkers, doing random drop-ins when people don't even know, having coworker spies, if you will, that let you know how things are going. Obviously talking to the family as well as the client, and keeping data, keeping progress notes. And in the most recent law that Congress passed related to rehab, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, they completely dropped out the follow along part for SE and CE, which to me is, you know, as somebody that was there at the beginning, it's a tragedy. I mean, the whole idea is you don't want to place and support and then fail. You want to place and support and retain, unless that person wants to then move on to another job, which is great. Okay, then they can use those 2 or 3 or 4 years of work as a wonderful work history to have. And ironically, some of the people that I mentioned earlier that we did in-depth case studies with online, when they were laid off during the worst of COVID last year, they were able to pick up unemployment insurance because they already had employment history, as opposed to hoping they could get back into a day program, which generally a lot of the day programs are closed, so they would just be sitting at home with no money coming in. So there's a lot to be said for developing a work history.